During dinner, my son's mother-in-law spat on my plate and yelled, "This is what you deserve, old woman." My son clapped and whispered, "MOM, please don't make this worse." I smiled calm but cold, then pulled out my phone and sent one text, "Execute the plan." What happened that night is something he will never forget. True story. This is exactly what you deserve. Trash. Those were the words that hung in the heavy, humid air of the dining room, vibrating in the silence that followed. I stared down at my plate, an exquisite piece of imported bone china rimmed with gold, which was now defiled. A glob of saliva, frothy and glistening, slowly slid down the rim of the plate, mingling with the remnants of the truffle risotto. 12 people sat around the long candlelit table. 12 pairs of eyes ranging from horrified to amused were fixed on me. At the head of the table sat Genevieve Sterling, the 65-year-old matriarch of one of New Orleans' oldest families. She stood there, her chest heaving beneath a silk blouse that cost more than my bakery earned in a month, wiping her mouth with a linen napkin as if she were the one who had been violated. She had just leaned over the centerpiece of white orchids and spat at me. But the spit was not what shattered my heart. The spit was just a physical insult, something I could wipe away. What truly broke me, what caused a fissure in my soul that I knew would never fully seal, was the voice that followed. "Mother, please just sit down. Don't provoke her anymore. You know how she gets." It was the voice of Julian, my Julian. The boy I had raised single-handedly in a small heat-soaked apartment above a jazz club. The boy whose college tuition I had paid for by kneading dough until my knuckles were swollen and my back felt like shattered glass. The man who was now looking at me, not with outrage on my behalf, but with annoyance. His eyes begged me to be silent, to swallow this bile, to not ruin his perfect dinner in the Garden District. In that suspended moment, looking at the weak, terrified man, my son had become something inside me. Did not break, it calcified, it turned into something cold, hard, and sharp. I reached into my purse with hands that were surprisingly steady. I pulled out my phone, unlocked the screen, and typed 3 simple words: "Execute the protocol." Genevieve let out a sharp, cruel laugh. "That sounded like glass breaking. Who are you texting?" "Alara, your little baking club. Are they coming to pick it outside my gate with baguettes?" I stood up slowly. I picked up my napkin and wiped the corner of my mouth. Though I hadn't eaten a bite, I spoke with a voice. I didn't recognize a voice stripped of all the warmth and hesitation that had defined me for decades. "No, Genevieve, my attorneys. To understand how a baker ended up sitting at a mahogany table in a mansion worth millions only to destroy the lives of everyone sitting around it, you have to understand who I was before the war began. My name is Era Vance. I am 58 years old. For most of my life, I was the invisible woman. I was the flower-dusted mother, the silent provider, the woman who shrank herself so her son could grow. I believed that humility was a virtue. I believed that if you gave love freely, it would eventually return to you. I was wrong. Humility without boundaries is just an invitation for disrespect. And that night, amidst the scent of expensive wax candles and old money, I decided to teach them a lesson, not a lesson in baking, but a lesson in power. 3 years ago. My life was small, contained and fragrant. I lived in the French Quarter of New Orleans in a narrow shotgun house with a courtyard overflowing with ferns and jasmine. Downstairs was my life's work. A small bakery called the Gilded Crumb. Every morning at 4, while the rest of the city was sleeping off the bourbon from the night before I was awake, I smelled of yeast, vanilla bean and chicory coffee. My world was defined by the heat of the ovens and the rhythm of my hands shaping dough. My customers were the locals, the jazz musicians finishing their sets, the hotel workers, the people who paid in crumpled singles and always left a smile. "Miss Alara." They would say, "Your beignet tastes like heaven." I didn't have wealth, but I had dignity, and I had Julian. Julian was my masterpiece. He was the reason I worked 18-hour days. He studied finance at Tulane, graduating at the top of his class. He was handsome, charming, and ambitious. When he got a job at a prestigious investment firm, I felt a pride so intense. It was almost painful. I remembered the nights I stitched his school uniforms because we couldn't afford new ones. I remembered the dinners I skipped so he could have a second portion. I thought he understood the cost of his success. I realized I was mistaken the day he introduced me to Bianca. It was a Sunday in late October. The air was thick and sweet. They arrived at the bakery. Just as I was closing up. "Mom," Julian said, his smile tight and nervous. "I want you to meet someone." Bianca Sterling was the kind of beautiful that requires a lot of maintenance. She was petite, blonde, and dressed in a white sundress that remained miraculously spotless in the city. Grime. She looked at my flour-stained apron and my messy bun with a gaze that was polite, but distant like a tourist, looking at an interesting but slightly dirty exhibit. "Charmed, Mrs. Vance," she said, extending a hand that felt like cold marble. "Welcome, dear," I said, wiping my hands on a towel before taking hers. "Would you like a coffee? A fresh pastry?" Bianca looked at Julian, a quick darting glance. "Oh, no thank you. My nutritionist advises against gluten and refined sugar, but it smells very rustic in here." Rustic. It was a polite word for poor. We went upstairs to my small living room. I served coffee in my mismatched ceramic mugs. Bianca held hers by the very rim. "Mom," Julian said, reaching for Bianca's free hand. "We have news. We're getting married." The joy I should have felt was immediately tempered by a cold knot in my stomach. "That is wonderful news," I managed to say. "Bianca, welcome to the family." "Thank you." Bianca said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "Julian has told me so much about your little shop. It is so quaint that you still work with your hands." "I am a baker," I said, straightening my back. "It is an honest trade." "Of course," Bianca replied smoothly. "It is very noble." Julian said nothing. He just squeezed her hand and steered the conversation toward the wedding venue. They left. An hour later, I sat in my living room, the silence ringing in my ears, and I cried. I cried because for the first time, I felt small in my own home. 2 weeks later came the invitation to meet the Sterling. Their estate was deep in the Garden District, a massive antebellum mansion surrounded by ancient oaks and wrought iron fences. It was a place that screamed exclusion. I arrived carrying a box of my signature, lemon tart, a recipe that had won local awards. The butler who opened the door looked at me as if I were a delivery driver. "Service entrance is around the back," he drawled. "I am Julian's mother," I said, clutching the box. He blinked. "Impasse, my apologies. Please follow me." He led me through a hallway lined with portraits of ancestors who looked down with judgment. We emerged onto a back patio that was larger than my entire house. The Sterling family was arranged on wicker furniture like royalty holding court. Genevieve Sterling sat in the center. A woman who wore her arrogance like a crown. Next to her was her husband Richard, a man with a red face and a glass of scotch that never seemed to empty. "Mom," Julian jumped up looking, relieved to see a familiar face, yet terrifyingly anxious. "This is my mother, Alara." Genevieve did not stand. She lowered her sunglasses and inspected me from my shoes to my hair. "Charming," she said. "Flatly sit." I sat on the edge of a plush sofa. "I brought a dessert," I offered, holding out the pink box. "It is a lemon tart with a lavender crust." Genevieve gestured to a maid. "Odette, take that to the kitchen. We will see if the staff wants it. We have a chef preparing a creme brulee." My tart disappeared, never to be seen again for the next 2 hours. I was a ghost. They talked about summer homes in the Hamptons, yachting trips to the Mediterranean, and people I did not know. Whenever I tried to speak to ask a question, Genevieve would smile condescendingly and change the subject. When I finally left, Genevieve offered me a cheek that felt like dry parchment. "You know, Aore," she whispered loud enough for everyone to hear. "It is so refreshing that Julian has such humble roots. It keeps him grounded. It is almost like a charity project for us on the drive home." Julian was silent. "Did you like them?" he asked finally. "They are very impressive," I said carefully. "Mom, you have to understand," Julian said, gripping the steering wheel. "They are different. They have standards I need to fit into their world. If I want to advance my career, Richard is going to open doors for me that I could never open alone." "And what about my door?" I wanted to ask the door I held open for 30 years. But I stayed silent. I wanted him to be happy. The wedding was a blur of excess. It was held at the mansion. I wore a navy blue dress I had saved for 6 months to buy. It was elegant, I thought, but surrounded by the designer gowns and diamonds of the sterling guests, I looked like the help. I was seated at table 19, near the kitchen doors with a deaf elderly aunt and 2 cousins who spent the entire meal texting. I watched my son dance with Genevieve. She whispered in his ear and he laughed. A sound of pure belonging. When he finally danced with me, he was stiff. "Thank you for everything, Mom," he recited as if reading from a script. "I love you, Julian," I whispered. I know that was it. "No, I love you too. Just I know." Months passed. Julian and Bianca moved into a renovated townhouse in a trendy part of the city, a gift from Richard and Genevieve. I stayed in the quarter, kneading my dough, waiting for phone calls that became shorter and less frequent. Then came the news. Bianca was pregnant. I was going to be a grandmother. The joy was overwhelming. I immediately started knitting. I bought the softest yellow wool and spent my evenings creating a blanket, stitching love into every loop. When Leo was born, Julian called me from the hospital. "He is here, Mom." "Leo." "Sterling Vance." Sterling Vance. The mother's name first a power move. "Can I come see him?" I asked, weeping with happiness. "Tomorrow. Bianca is tired and Genevieve is here managing the doctors." When I arrived the next day, clutching my yellow blanket and a teddy bear. The room was full of balloons and flowers. Genevieve was holding the baby. She looked at me as I entered. "Ella, wash your hands before you come any closer. Hospitals are full of germs and we don't know what you've touched on the way here." I scrubbed my hands until they were raw. I approached the bed. "Can I hold him?" Bianca looked at Genevieve. Genevieve gave a barely perceptible nod briefly. Genevieve said he needs to feed soon. I held Leo. He was warm, heavy, and perfect. I pulled out the blanket. "I made this for him," I said softly. Genevieve reached out and touched the wool with 2 fingers. "Wool. Oh, Ilara, we cannot use this. Its scratches and fibers can be inhaled. We only use organic hypoallergenic, bamboo cotton." For Leo, she took the blanket from me and placed it on a chair, buried under a pile of magazines. It was never used. Over the next year, I became the second-class grandmother. I saw photos on social media of Leo's first birthday party, a lavish affair with ponies and clowns, to which I was invited only as an afterthought, arriving to find there was no seat assigned to me at the family table. I stood in the back eating cake off a paper napkin. While Genevieve held court, I began to wither. I questioned everything I had done. Had my sacrifice been worth it? Was I truly just an embarrassment? Then came the turning point. It didn't come with a bang, but with a phone call on a rainy Tuesday. "Mrs. Vance, this is Marcus Thorne, attorney at law." I froze. "Is Julian okay?" "He is fine. I'm contacting you regarding the estate of your late ex-husband, Silas Vance." Silas, the man who had walked out on us when Julian was 3. I hadn't heard his name in decades. Silas passed away 6 months ago in Houston. Mr. Thorne said he did quite well for himself in the shipping industry. He left a substantial trust. I felt a bitter laugh bubble up. He left me nothing when he was alive. He left the entire estate to Julian. Mr. Thorne continued. "There is a stipulation. A letter of intent was attached to the will. Silas wanted to make amends. He instructed Julian that a portion of the funds, specifically a monthly stipend and a lump sum for your retirement, was to be given to you. He wanted to ensure the woman who raised his son was cared for." I sat down heavily on a sack of flour. "How much?" "The total estate is valued at roughly $6 million. The room spun and Julian knows. Mr. Thorne paused. "That is why I'm calling you Mrs. Vance." Julian executed the transfer of funds into his own accounts 5 months ago. He signed an affidavit stating he would inform you and manage the distribution. I have tried to follow up, but he has blocked my calls. I did some digging and I have reason to believe you have not received a dime. Not a dime. My son, who knew I was still working 12-hour days with arthritis in my hands, had inherited millions and hidden it from me. Why are you telling me this now? I whispered because Mr. Thorne said, his voice dropping an octave. I liked Silas in his later years. He regretted leaving you, and because I detest greed legally, Julian has the money, but the moral claim, the fraud and the affidavit. That gives us leverage. I hung up the phone and walked out into the rain. I walked for hours through the French Quarter. I looked at the tourists, the musicians, the life pulsing around me. I thought about the boy I had nursed through fevers. I thought about the man who looked at me with shame. That night I did not sleep. I went to Julian's house. The next day, he opened the door looking annoyed. Mom, you should have called. We are busy preparing for a gala. We need to talk Julian about Silas. His face went the color of ash. He ushered me inside quickly, looking around to see if the neighbors were watching. We stood in his foyer under a crystal chandelier. You know, he said, his voice trembling. I know about the money. I know about the letter. Why Julian? Mom, listen, it's complicated. Silas abandoned us. We owe him nothing. I invested that money. I put it into Richard's company. It's growing. It's for Leo's future. And what about my present? I asked, what about the fact that he specifically asked you to care for me? Julian insisted we were going to buy you a condo eventually, but right now we need liquidity. The Sterlings. Richard's business is going through a cash flow issue. We needed the capital to secure our position. You gave my money to Richard Sterling. It's an investment. And listen, Mom, since you're here, he ran to a side table and grabbed a folder. Genevieve and Bianca wanted me to give you this. I opened the folder. It was a legal document, a voluntary relinquishment of grandparental rights. What is this? It's just a formality. Julian said, sweating. Now with the new baby coming, he flinched. Yes. Bianca is pregnant again. A girl. Look, Genevieve feels that your lifestyle and your resentment are toxic for the children. If you sign this, we can set up a supervised visit once a month, and maybe in a few years we can discuss the money. I looked at my son. I looked at the signature line waiting for my name. They wanted to buy my disappearance with my own stolen money. I won't sign this, Julian. Mom, please. If you don't sign it, Genevieve is going to sue for full restrictive custody. She has lawyers. You can't imagine. She'll paint you as unstable, poor senile. Just sign it. I dropped the folder on the floor. I looked him in the eye. I am not signing. Get out, he hissed. If you want to play hardball, Alara, you're going to lose. You're a baker. We are the Sterlings. I left. I went straight to Marcus Thorne's office. We have a lot of work to do. I told him for the next 3 weeks I was a spy in my own life. Marcus hired a forensic accountant. We dug into Richard Sterling's cash flow issues. What we found was not just a cash flow issue, it was a Ponzi scheme. Richard had been using new investor money to pay off debts for years. Julian's inheritance. My $6 million had been dumped into a sinking ship to keep the Sterling lifestyle afloat for just a few more months. But I needed more than just financial proof. I needed to expose their character. I reached out to Odette, the maid, who had taken my tart that first day. I met her at a coffee shop far from the Garden District. Why would you help me? I asked her. Because Odette said, sipping her tea. Mrs. Genevieve treats us like dogs, and because I saw how she treated you, no mother deserves that. She handed me a small USB drive. I put a recorder in the parlor, she whispered, they talk when they think no one is listening. I listened to the recording that night. It was Genevieve's voice, clear and sharp. We need to make sure Alara is declared unfit before the baby is born. We can use her poverty against her, say her house is unsanitary. Julian is on board. He's weak, but he's greedy. He knows if Alara gets the money, our ship sinks. I had the smoking gun. Then came the invitation to the dinner. It was a reconciliation dinner according to Julian's text, a chance to move forward. I knew what it was. It was an ambush to bully me into signing the papers I accepted. I spent the last of my savings on a dress, not navy blue, emerald, green silk. I had my hair done. I put on makeup. I looked in the mirror and saw a stranger, a warrior. I arrived at the mansion. The atmosphere was tense. They seated me at the end of the table. Again, the conversation was pointed, filled with barbs about my struggling business and my lonely life. Then came the moment the main course was cleared. Genevieve stood up to make a toast to family. She said, raising her glass, and to knowing one's place. She looked at me. Elara darling, we have the papers ready in the study. We expect you to sign them before dessert. It's for the best. You really aren't equipped to be part of this dynasty. I looked up. I am not signing anything, Genevieve. And as for your dynasty, it's built on sand. The table went silent. Genevieve's face turned purple. How dare you? You ungrateful little peasant. You should be on your knees thanking us for letting you breathe our air. She leaned over. She gathered the saliva in her mouth, a grotesque display of hatred and spat. It landed on my plate right next to the crystal glass. This is exactly what you deserve. Trash. She hissed, and then Julian spoke his fatal words. Mom, please behave. I sent the text, execute the protocol. My attorneys, Genevieve laughed. You can't afford a lawyer. I can afford the best lawyers in the state, Genevieve, because unlike you, I am not bankrupt. The color drained from Richard Sterling's face. What did you say? The doorbell rang. Odette opened it. Marcus Thorne walked in, followed by 2 federal agents and a process server. Good evening, Marcus said, his voice booming. I have a warrant for the seizure of financial records regarding the Sterling Investment Group, and I have a civil lawsuit for fraud, embezzlement, and emotional distress. On behalf of Mrs. Era Vance. Richard stood up, knocking over his chair. This is preposterous. Is it? Marcus threw a file on the table. We have the bank transfers, Richard. We know you took Julian's $6 million inheritance money that legally belonged to the Vance estate and used it to pay off your gambling debts and the mortgage on this house. Julian looked at Richard. You said it was an investment. You said the money was safe. Richard didn't answer. He was looking at the federal agents. And you, Marcus turned to Genevieve. We have a recording of you conspiring to fabricate evidence against a grandmother to deny her visitation rights in the state of Louisiana. That is a serious offense. The recording played. Genevieve's voice filled the room. Cruel and calculating, Bianca gasped, covering her mouth. Mom, is that true? Bianca whispered. Genevieve sank into her chair. She looked suddenly old, her skin sagging, her eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal. I stood up. I walked over to Julian. He was weeping, his head in his hands. You chose them. Julian. You chose the illusion of wealth over your own mother. You stole from me. Not just money, but trust, Mom. I didn't know Richard was stealing it. I just wanted to belong. You belong nowhere. Now, I said softly. I turned to Genevieve. She looked up at me, terrified. You spat on my plate. Genevieve, you called me trash. But looking around this table, seeing the lies, the theft, the cruelty, I think we both know who the trash really is. I walked out of the mansion. The heavy oak doors closed behind me with a final resounding thud. I stood on the porch and took a deep breath of the night air. It smelled of jasmine and rain. It smelled of freedom. The fallout was swift and brutal. The Sterling Empire collapsed within days. Richard was arrested for securities fraud. The mansion was seized by the bank. The news was everywhere. High society fraud. The headlines screamed. Genevieve was ruined. Her friends, the ladies who lunched the charity boards, abandoned her instantly. She was left with nothing but her arrogance, which holds no value in the pawn shop of life. Julian lost everything. The money was gone. His job fired him to distance themselves from the scandal. He and Bianca were evicted from the townhouse for months. I didn't hear from them. I focused on my bakery. I used the retirement settlement. Marcus managed to claw back from the remaining assets to renovate the Gilded Crumb. It became a sanctuary. 6 months later, I found Genevieve. I was walking through the French market buying strawberries. I saw a woman working at a tourist stall selling cheap plastic Mardi Gras beads. She wore a simple uniform. Looked at the money. Then at me, her eyes filled with tears. "Thank you," she whispered. It wasn't forgiveness. But it was the end of the hate. Hate is too heavy, a burden to carry when you have dough to knead. Julian came to me a year later. He walked into the bakery thin, tired, wearing cheap clothes. He stood in the line like a customer. When he got to the counter, he didn't ask for money. He didn't ask for help. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said. I looked at him, the arrogance was gone. The sterling polish had rubbed off, leaving the boy. "I used to know." "I know." I said, Can I see you sometimes? I don't expect anything. I miss you." I handed him a warm biger. "Start by sweeping the floor." I said, "Then we'll talk." He grabbed the broom today. My life is full. The bakery is thriving. Julian works with me now. He handles the books honestly this time and helps with the deliveries. Bianca left him unable to cope with the poverty, but she brings Leo and the new baby Chloe to visit on weekends. She is humbled, quiet, grateful for the free pastries I give the children. I look at Leo, his face covered in powdered sugar, and I smile. I learned a powerful lesson that night at the mahogany table. Dignity is not something people give you. It is something you forge. You cannot demand respect if you are willing to accept crumbs. I stopped accepting crumbs, and in doing so, I built a banquet of my own. We must teach our children that character is the only currency that doesn't devalue, and sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let people face the consequences of their own actions. It broke my heart to watch my son fall, but it was the only way he could learn to stand on his own 2 feet. So if you ever feel invisible, if you ever feel like the world is spitting on your plate, remember Alara Vance, wipe your face. Stand up and execute your protocol. Because the best revenge is not destruction. It is thriving in the face of those who wish to see you fail. God bless you all. Never forget your worth. Her hair was gray. The dye having grown out long ago. It was Genevieve. She saw me. She didn't sneer. She didn't look away. She looked down at her hands. I walked over. "Hello, Genevieve." She flinched. "Alara. Are you here to gloat?" "No." I said, "I'm here to buy some beads." She looked up confused. "Why?" "Because everyone has to make a living." I said, "I bought a strand of purple beads." I paid her and I left a $20 tip. "Keep the change," I said. She